The fluorescent lights in Marcus Webb's corner office had been dimmed to what he probably thought was a power move setting when he slid my performance review across his glass desk like he was dealing a losing hand of cards. 12 years. 12 years of building Hartwell Logistics from a regional freight company into a national operation that moved $340 million in goods annually, and this 31-year-old with a Wharton MBA and his father's last name on the building was about to tell me I wasn't leadership material. I kept my hands flat on my knees. 22 years in the Army taught me that when everything in you wants to react, you go still instead. He cleared his throat. Daniel, we've done a thorough evaluation of the candidates for regional director. He paused, letting the silence do his dirty work. The executive team feels that while your operational contributions have been significant, the role requires someone with a more contemporary management philosophy. Someone who can interface with our new tech-forward initiatives. Contemporary management philosophy. The man had been here 14 months. He'd attended exactly 2 client meetings that I could recall, both of which I'd spent 3 days prepping briefing packets for. His tech-forward initiatives consisted of buying a dashboard software subscription that nobody knew how to use, including him. I understand, I said. Thank you for letting me know. He looked almost disappointed that I didn't argue. Of course, we value your experience enormously. The Caldwell account, the Pacific Northwest expansion, none of that happens without you. He was already glancing at his phone. The Meridian Freight audit needs your attention this week. Ramirez from compliance has been asking. I gathered my folder and walked out of that office a different man than the one who'd walked in. My name is Daniel Carr. I'm 53 years old. I spent 2 decades in the Army as a logistics officer, the kind of work where getting a supply chain wrong doesn't mean a late delivery. It means soldiers in the field without food, fuel, or ammunition. When I retired and came to Hartwell, I brought that same precision with me. I built their routing systems from scratch, renegotiated half their carrier contracts, and turned the Pacific Northwest Division from a money pit into their most profitable region 3 years running. I did all of this while raising my daughter Maya on my own after her mother and I divorced. Maya was 14 when I started at Hartwell, already sharp as a tack, already talking about environmental engineering programs. She was 26 now, 2 years into her PhD program at UC Davis, and the tuition assistance I'd been providing was the reason I'd pushed so hard for this promotion. The regional director's salary would have meant I could cover her final 2 years without her taking on additional debt. We'd talked about it over the phone just last week. You'll get it, Dad, she'd said. You always figure things out. I sat in my truck in the Hartwell parking garage for 11 minutes. I didn't call Maya. I didn't call my brother. I just sat there looking at the concrete wall in front of me and made a decision that had been a long time coming. I was done carrying this company on my back while someone else got the title. The next morning I arrived at exactly 8 o'clock. Not 7:15, not 7:30, 8 o'clock, which is what my employment contract specified as the start of my working day. For the first time in 12 years, I walked past the operations bullpen without stopping to review the overnight freight reports. I did not check in with the dispatch team. I did not pull up the Meridian audit before my coffee was finished. I opened my task management system and looked for the first time with clear eyes at what was actually assigned to me versus what I had simply absorbed over the years because nobody else would. My official responsibilities filled about 40% of my calendar. The other 60% was institutional glue, the work that held everything together, because I happened to know how it all connected and I'd never said no. I started a new list. Everything in column A was mine. Everything in column B belonged to someone else's job description. By 9:30, my phone showed 3 messages from Tommy Okafor, our senior dispatcher, about a routing conflict on the Caldwell account. Caldwell Chemical was our biggest client, $28 million annually. Specialized hazmat transport requiring permits that varied state by state. I knew those routes the way I knew my own address. I had personally negotiated Caldwell's contract and handled every operational escalation for 6 years. I forwarded Tommy's message to Marcus's assistant with a note. Please route to the appropriate department head per the regional chain of command. I'm focused on the Meridian compliance audit today. I could almost hear Tommy's confusion from across the building. An hour later, he appeared at my desk in person. Tommy was a good man, ex-Marine, 15 years at Hartwell. The kind of dispatcher who could untangle a 6-state routing nightmare before most people finished their morning meeting. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's just started speaking a foreign language. Dan, the Caldwell coordinator, is asking about the permit amendments for the Utah corridor. She's called twice. I told her you were busy, but who's the assigned account manager on Caldwell? I asked, not looking up from the compliance spreadsheet I was actually supposed to be completing. Tommy blinked. Officially? I guess that would be Sandra in client services. Then Sandra should be handling her calls. I finally looked up. I'm finalizing the Meridian audit. It's due to the DOT regional office by Friday. He stared at me for a long moment. In 12 years, he had never once heard me redirect a Caldwell issue. You feeling okay? Never better. Just trying to work within my actual scope, trying to be more aligned with my role in the organization. He left slowly, glancing back twice. Sandra from Client Services lasted approximately 45 minutes before she appeared at my desk, pale as paper. Sandra was 28, smart, good with clients on routine matters, but the Caldwell accounts permit architecture was something I'd spent years building. She held a printout like it was written in Mandarin. Daniel, I've been looking at these Utah corridor amendments and I genuinely don't know where to start. The permit categories alone, there's a master permit guide in the shared drive, I said pleasantly. Under Carrier Compliance, subfolder Caldwell Industries, subfolder State-by-State Regulatory. I built it in 2019 and updated it every quarter since. She pulled it up on her phone right there at my desk, scrolled through it, went slightly paler. There's like 200 pages. 214. Everything's indexed. The Utah section starts on page 89. Can't you just... I have a federal compliance deadline on Friday, I said. The Meridian audit affects our DOT operating license. I really can't deprioritize that. She nodded and walked away with the expression of someone who'd just been handed a live grenade. At 5 o'clock, I shut down my computer, put on my jacket, and left. No overtime. No checking my phone in the parking garage. No mental inventory of tomorrow's problems while I drove home. Maya called while I was making dinner. How'd the week start? Interesting, I said. Did you hear back about the promotion? I told her. There was a long pause. Dad. That's okay. That's ridiculous. Maybe. But things are changing. What does that mean? It means I'm done working 2 jobs for the pay of 1. I heard her exhale slowly on the other end. Don't worry about your tuition. I'll figure it out. I'm not worried about tuition, she said quietly. I'm worried about you. We talked for an hour. It was the longest conversation we'd had in months, which told me something about how much of myself I'd been pouring into that building. My work phone buzzed 14 times before I put it face down on the kitchen counter. By Tuesday, the cracks were visible. I arrived at 8, settled at my desk, and could feel the difference in the air before I'd poured my first cup of coffee. The dispatch floor had the particular energy of people who'd been up too late, solving problems they didn't fully understand. Tommy met me at the hallway with the look of a man running on 3 hours of sleep. The Utah shipment is sitting at a weigh station in Provo, he said without preamble. Permit discrepancy. Caldwell's VP of Operations called Marcus directly at 7 this morning. What did Marcus tell him? Tommy's expression was its own answer. He told him you'd handle it. Marcus knows where my desk is, I said. I sat down, opened the Meridian audit, and kept working. 17 minutes later, Marcus appeared. His collar was open in a way I'd never seen before. This was a man who wore full Windsor knots to internal department meetings. He had the focused agitation of someone who'd just been yelled at by a client worth $28 million. Daniel, the Caldwell situation. I heard. Utah corridor permit discrepancy. I pulled up the compliance calendar on my screen. The amendment filing window was last Thursday. I sent a reminder to the appropriate department in my handover note. I opened my sent mail and turned the screen slightly toward him. 3 weeks ago, actually. He stared at the email. His jaw worked slightly. Why wasn't this escalated? It was. To the Regional Operations Coordinator, per the updated chain of command from your reorganization last quarter. I watched him absorb that. Would you like me to forward the thread? He was silent for a moment. Around us, I was aware of 3 colleagues who had suddenly become very interested in their own screens. Can you fix it? The permit amendment requires a wet signature from a licensed hazmat compliance officer and a 72-hour processing window with the Utah DMV, I said. I can initiate it today. The shipment will be delayed approximately 3 to 4 days depending on how quickly the state office processes the paperwork. Caldwell is going to lose their mind. Probably, I agreed. Would you like me to draft the client communication as well, or will you be handling that directly? He looked at me the way people look at a piece of furniture that has suddenly started talking back. Draft it, he said finally, and get the amendment started. Of course. I'll work on it between sections 4 and 5 of the Meridian audit. The DOT deadline is still Friday. I want to make sure I don't jeopardize our operating license while resolving the Caldwell issue. He walked away without responding. I finished my coffee. That evening, I left at 5. My phone showed 31 missed calls by the time I checked it at 8 p.m. Tommy had left 4 voicemails, each progressively more strained. Marcus's assistant had called twice. There were 2 calls from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Caldwell's VP of Operations, who had somehow obtained my personal cell number, a number I had given to exactly nobody at Hartwell. I listened to all of them. I set the phone on my nightstand. I read 40 pages of a novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 months. I slept 8 hours. Wednesday morning, I walked into a building that felt like the last 20 minutes of a flight hitting serious turbulence. 2 other accounts had experienced issues overnight, both involving routing decisions that had historically come to me as informal escalations, because the formal process was slow and everyone knew I'd solve it faster. Without my informal intervention, the formal process had run at its actual speed, which was not fast. Marcus was on a video call in his office when I passed. His father, our CEO Richard Webb, was visible on the screen. I had met Richard exactly 4 times in 12 years. Which told you everything about how involved he was in day-to-day operations. I sat at my desk and pulled up the Meridian audit. Tommy materialized beside me 20 minutes later. Dan, I need you to be straight with me. He lowered his voice. Is this about the promotion? I looked up at him. Tommy was one of the few people at Hartwell I genuinely respected. He'd built his career the same way I had, from the ground up, solving real problems. I'm doing my job, I said. Exactly my job. Nothing more, nothing less. He studied me for a long moment. You know what's happening out there. I know a few shipments are delayed, and some permits need filing. Caldwell called Richard Webb directly. He paused to let that land. First time in 6 years. Richard apparently didn't know there was a permit issue because he stopped. Because he assumed everything was running smoothly, I said, the way it always does. Tommy sat down in the chair across from me, leaned forward. They're going to blame you for this. They can try, I said. I've been completing the tasks assigned to me. The Meridian audit will be submitted on time. The Caldwell permit amendment was initiated yesterday per the correct process. I opened my desk drawer and placed a thin folder on the surface. I've been documenting everything. He looked at the folder, looked at me. You've changed, man. I've clarified, I said. There's a difference. Richard Webb's assistant called at 11:15. Emergency meeting, conference room B, noon. Please bring relevant documentation. I brought the Meridian audit, my documented task logs for the past 3 days, and the folder. The conference room held Marcus, Richard Webb in person, which was unusual enough to mean something serious, and Caldwell's VP of Operations, a trim woman named Patricia Okonkwo, joining by video from their Houston headquarters. Patricia had worked with me directly for 5 years. She knew what I knew, and she knew what Marcus didn't. Richard Webb was 64, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd built something real before handing it to his son to run. He looked at me across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Daniel, he said, I appreciate you being here. Of course. Patricia Okonkwo spoke first, with the directness of someone who hadn't driven to a VP title by being indirect. We have a chemical shipment sitting at a way station in Utah, a 4-day delay on a time-sensitive delivery, and 3 clients who are calling me to ask if Hartwell is having internal problems. She let that sit. I'll be honest, in 5 years working with Hartwell, I've never had to call Richard directly. Daniel has always handled our escalations before they became escalations. That's precisely the issue we're here to address, Richard said. He looked at Marcus, then back at me. Daniel, help me understand what happened this week. I opened my folder. The Utah permit amendment required filing during a window that closed last Thursday. I sent documentation to the regional operations team 3 weeks ago flagging the deadline. I slid the printed email across the table. When the deadline passed without action, the shipment was flagged at the way station. I initiated the amendment process yesterday through the appropriate channel. It's in process now. Why wasn't it handled before it became an issue? Richard asked. Historically, I would have caught it myself and handled it informally, I said, outside my official scope. I've been working to stay within my assigned responsibilities. The room was quiet. Marcus found his voice. What does that mean exactly? It means that for 12 years, I've been doing the work of approximately 2 roles. My official job description and the institutional management that exists because I built the systems and nobody else fully understands them. I kept my voice even. I was recently evaluated for a promotion that would have formalized and compensated that scope. The evaluation determined I wasn't the right fit for a leadership role. I paused. So I started working my actual role. Patricia's expression on the video screen shifted almost imperceptibly. She dealt with enough operations people to know exactly what she was hearing. Richard Webb looked at his son for a long moment. Marcus was studying the table. Patricia, Richard said, I want to assure you that the Caldwell account remains our highest priority. I know it does, she said. Because of Daniel. Richard, with respect, if Hartwell loses Daniel Carr, we'll be having a different conversation about our contract. That's not a threat. It's an operational reality. He's the only person who fully understands what it takes to move our product across 12 states without incident. After the video call ended, Marcus left the conference room without speaking. Richard Webb remained seated. He gestured for me to stay. "Tell me what happened with the promotion," he said. I told him. Directly and without editorializing. The 15 months of preparation, the portfolio, the meeting, the phrase contemporary management philosophy. He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been with us?" 12 years. And before that, 22 years in the Army. Logistics officer. Last posting was supervising supply chain operations for a forward deployment of 3,000 personnel. He absorbed that. "What would it take to keep you here?" "Recognition that matches what I actually contribute," I said. "Compensation that reflects the scope I've been working at, not the scope on my job description. And the authority to build something, not just maintain it." He nodded slowly. "I want to create a VP of operations role, reporting directly to me." He named a number. It was substantially more than the regional director salary I'd been passed over for. Full authority over carrier relationships, compliance infrastructure, and routing systems. Your team, your hires. I held that number in my head for a moment. It was enough to cover Maya's remaining tuition and set aside the emergency fund I'd been meaning to build for 3 years. "I appreciate that," I said, "but I want to be honest with you. I've had a preliminary conversation with a competitor." This was true. I'd taken a call 2 weeks ago from a recruiter at Vanguard Freight that I hadn't followed up on. "They believe my experience qualifies me for a senior leadership role there." Richard didn't blink. "Then, let's make sure you don't need to find out." "It's not only about the number," I said. "I spent 12 years being the person who fixed things quietly so others could take credit publicly. I don't want to rebuild that dynamic in a new title." He leaned back. "That's a fair concern, and one I should have caught earlier." He looked out the window at the floor of the building his father had started. "Marcus is strong on the client relationship side, business development, external partnerships. He has real ability there. He's been trying to manage operations because he thought that was what a director was supposed to do." "He's been managing things he doesn't understand," I said. "That's different from managing things he could understand." Richard looked at me. "What would you need to make this work, not just the job, but the structure?" I thought about Tommy's face when I'd told him I was just doing my job, about Sandra holding that 200-page permit guide on her phone, about the 15 people on my floor who'd been absorbing pieces of my institutional knowledge for years without ever being formally trained on it. "A real succession plan," I said. "Not just for me, for everything I know. I want to build a team that can function without any single person being a single point of failure, including me." He studied me the way people do when they're recalibrating who they're talking to. "That," he said, "is the most leadership-minded thing anyone in this company has said to me in 14 months. He pushed a legal pad across the table. "Write down what you need. Let's build it." I took the pen. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't managing Hartwell's problems in silence. I was designing something. The offer letter arrived in my inbox at 4:15. I read it twice, then called Maya. "They made you VP?" Her voice had that particular pitch that meant she was about to cry and was annoyed about it. "Director of Operations, reporting to the CEO. Different thing." "Same thing, Dad. The salary is different," I said. "Your last 2 years of tuition are covered. The rest goes into an actual savings account like a person who has their priorities straight." She laughed. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Are you happy?" I thought about the folder I'd kept. The 3 days of walking out at 5 o'clock. The conversation with Richard Webb where I'd said, out loud, to the person who owned the company, exactly what I needed and why. "I think I'm getting there," I said. The next morning, I had a conversation with Marcus that neither of us had been looking forward to. He looked like he hadn't slept well since Tuesday, which was probably accurate. I knocked on his open door at 9, and he gestured to the chair across from his desk. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. The words came out stiff, like they'd been rehearsed. "I made a decision about your leadership potential without understanding what you actually did." "What did you think I was missing?" I asked. He turned a pen over in his hand. "You're not visible, in the way that leadership is visible. You don't present, you don't work the room, you don't." He stopped. "I solve problems before anyone knows there's a problem," I said. "So the credit goes to the smooth operation instead of the person maintaining it." He had the grace to not argue that point. "My father wants us to work together on the structural changes." "I know," I said. "Here's what I think that looks like." I slid a 1-page outline across his desk. I'd written it that morning at 6:30. My choice this time. You handle what you're actually good at. External partnerships, client relationships, the pitch work, you're effective at that. I'll handle operations, compliance, and the systems infrastructure. We stop pretending one role has to do everything. He read the outline. Read it again. This divides the authority pretty clearly. That's the point. He set it down. The Caldwell situation, Patricia Okonkwo specifically requested you be the primary contact going forward. Formally, I know. Patricia had sent me a separate email that morning. I'm going to propose we formalize that model across all major accounts. Primary technical contact versus primary relationship contact. You and I stop fighting over the same lane. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but the beginnings of a working understanding. My father was right about you, he said. He should have been right about me 14 months ago, I said. Not unkindly, just factually. 3 months later, the operations floor looked different. Not cosmetically, we hadn't moved a single desk, but in the way it functioned. I'd brought in 2 people I'd been watching for years. Carlos Rivera from our Denver hub, who understood carrier relationships better than anyone I'd ever trained, and Joan Whitfield, a compliance specialist who'd been buried in our risk management department doing work 3 levels below her capability. Together we'd built a documentation system that assumed any person could walk off the street and understand how Hartwell's operations worked in 90 days. Tommy had been formally promoted to senior operations manager. His first week in the title, he'd solved a Pacific Northwest routing crisis I had nothing to do with, because he now had the authority and the documentation to do it himself. The Caldwell contract expanded. Patricia Okonkwo flew in for a quarterly review and told me over coffee that she'd recommended Hartwell to 2 other companies in the chemical sector. Marcus, freed from trying to manage systems he'd never understood, had closed 2 new regional partnerships that had genuinely impressed his father. We had a standing Thursday meeting that had started tense and was slowly becoming something that resembled a functional professional relationship. I left the building at 5 o'clock on a Friday when Maya's research cohort published their first study. She'd texted me a link at 4:58. I was in the parking garage before the hour turned, driving home to read it. She called while I was at a stoplight. Did you read it? I'm reading it now. Don't call me while I'm driving. Dad. It's good, Maya. The light changed. It's really good. Your mother would have printed it out and put it on the refrigerator. She laughed softly at that. I thought about the 11 minutes I'd spent in the parking garage 6 months ago, staring at a concrete wall. About the moment I decided to stop carrying something that had never been mine to carry alone. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't working harder than everyone around you. It's stopping long enough to make them see what they've been standing on.